and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous, and today we will be diving into an insightful discussion on the recent remarks made by US President-elect Donald Trump ahead of his inauguration. President-elect Donald Trump has reiterated his desire for the US to acquire Greenland and the Panama Canal. He called both of the regions critical to American national security. When asked if he would rule out using military or economic force to take over the autonomous territory or the canal, he said, "No, I can't assure you on either of these two." The boundary between the US and Canada is the world's longest between two countries. It was established in treaties dated back to the founding of the USA in the late 1700s. Trump said in the same conference that he believes that Canada should become the 51st US state, as he claims that the USA spends billions of dollars protecting this country. He also criticised imports of Canadian cars, lumber and dairy products. In response to Trump's statements, French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot said that European Union will not allow other countries to attack their sovereign borders. He added that he did not believe Trump would actually invade Greenland. As we dive into this discussion, we have four guests with us. Ross Feingold, political risk analyst in Taipei, Taiwan. Irina Zuckerman, senior journalist in New York. Daniel Wagner, author and risk management expert in Oregon. Mahkesh Sachdev, former diplomat here in Delhi. Welcome, all of you. I want to go to Ross Feingold first. I was wondering, why does the president-elect want to reconsider this deal with the Panama Canal that was signed under the late Jimmy Carter in the 1970s?
The arrangement, the treaty to turn the Panama Canal over to Panama was very controversial at the time, as well as down through the years. More conservative or Republican members of the United States Congress, as well as conservative foreign policy experts, for example, in the scholarly community, they thought it was an irresponsible thing for Jimmy Carter to do. Obviously, Jimmy Carter thought otherwise. Most Democrats think otherwise as well. They thought it was the right thing to do. This is in Panama. The U.S. had already controlled it for a considerable amount of time. And the U.S. really has no business taking some of Panama's sovereign territory and running this canal. So there was very divided opinion at the time the deal was made. We know that Trump has his personal style. He's not going to hold back. He's not going to be cautious when he goes after things that he thinks fall within the sphere of making America great again. And for better or for worse, he's identified the Panama Canal. This also might just be a starting point for negotiation so that U.S. ships could get better fees or lower fees when transiting the canal.
Irina, I wanted to come on to you in this next one. Trump has not ruled out military action in his wanting for the Panama Canal. Do you think he could really do this? Do you think he could really push military intervention in this country?
Thank you so much for asking the question. I agree that to some extent a lot of this is bluff. From Trump's perspective, it has several advantages. First of all, it brings attention to important issues such as natural resources, security access, and for both the United States and adversarial countries, and his own willingness to go to bat for U.S. interests, apparently. The other advantage is that very aggressive rhetoric distracts from his shortcomings in other areas. For instance, he has promised to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours from taking office, but has had to backtrack on those issues. So he's seeking to restore his own image by engaging in these very distracting rhetorical maneuvers that keep the headlines going, and also he can't help himself to some extent. Somebody plants an idea and he goes with it and goes with it until he feels he got a win. In terms of practical applications, in terms of economic force, for sure, he can apply tariffs and economic pressure to those countries to make significant concessions. For instance, expanding the existing military base, Greenland. Greenland also has a nascent independence movement, which he is trying to take advantage of. Not all forms of military force require congressional authorizations, but funding for such operations does. Um, and I think given the long list of priorities that Trump has announced during his campaign, in terms of foreign policy, the Middle East, restoring freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, the Russia-Ukraine war, the tariffs on Canadian and Mexican and Chinese goods, all of these things make it unlikely that he could even get to this idea in very short order. Most likely his time will be taken up by more important issues, and in the meantime, he is keeping himself in the headlines where he wants to be.
Daniel, I wanted to ask you, what are the possible risks or benefit to regaining control over the Panama Canal, given its global importance for shipping and trade?
First of all, I want to say, let's not forget that we learned during the first Trump administration that we should listen to what he says, but we should watch what he does. And he is the king of bombast and the king of raising people's blood pressure, and that's exactly what he's doing now. In terms of the Panama Canal, well, let's bear in mind also, it is in America's sphere of influence, and the sphere of influence is very much what Trump is trying to achieve now. He's trying to sort of re-exert, if you will, the Monroe Doctrine of the America from the last century, and the idea that oversized Chinese influence in the Panama Canal is not likely to stand under his administration. So all of that is at play at the same time. Do I think it's likely that he's going to send the military to take over the Panama Canal? No, I don't. But by the same token, I think it's probable that the Panamanian government will come to some understanding with the Trump administration about how things will work for the next 4 years. We shouldn't forget also that big power politics are certainly at play, spheres of influence are certainly at play vis-a-vis Greenland in terms of what he's trying to do there. As for Canada and making them the 51st state, well, I think he wants to bring the new Canadian Prime Minister, when he or she assumes office in March, to heel, and he wants to, flex his muscles with Canada just as much as he does with these other countries.
Mahesh, I wanted to move to you on this next one. Obviously, one of the other territories in question is Greenland. Donald Trump Jr. has just come back from a trip there as a tourist, and he's hinted at using military or economic pressure to take over. Do you think such an approach would harm America's image?
Not necessarily. Domestically, the lobby that elected Donald Trump would be thrilled to see their hero returning to the Trump 1 kind of bomb blast and hyperventilation. So his domestic popularity is probably not going to be impacted. In fact, it may be even boosted. Abroad, it is, to me, a diversionary tactic where all sort of promises that he has made to stop Ukraine war, to stop Gaza war, hell to pay, and so on and so forth, the rhetoric, he wants these to be distracted from, and he realizes that these promises or assertions are not going to stand the test of reality. Thirdly, I also agree that much of it is agit propaganda, agit prop, as it is called, keeping focus on himself, keeping his opponents at bay and wondering where does he hit next. And this is something which keeps him in the headlines forever, which is the way he got back to the White House all over again. So it's more of the same, and perhaps no lessons have been learned. Thank you.
Ross Feingold, what strategic value does Greenland hold for the United States, and is it justified are aggressive measures justified?
This is a really interesting question because the answer today is so different than, say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago or during the Cold War, even earlier. Well, with climate change and the ice melting, access is opening up to this part of the globe. And we see a competition for influence or for power within this area among the usual suspects, United States, China, and Russia. Also, even between Europe and the United States, the quickest shipping route is to pass near to Greenland. So strategically, it certainly is an important place. That's why the United States has had a military base there for many, many years, dating back to the beginning of the Cold War. So we can understand the strategic value that Greenland would have to the United States. But of course, as I think the other colleagues would agree, that doesn't mean that the government of Denmark or the government of Greenland or the people of Greenland will willingly submit to becoming a part of the United States.
Irina, I wanted to move on to Canada now. Obviously, Trump joked about Canada becoming the 51st state, but said he wouldn't support, you wouldn't use military force. Trudeau has completely said that there's no chance in hell that this would happen. How should we interpret these comments, and how might they affect US-Canada relations in the future?
Be clear, I don't think Trump is serious about annexing Canada. I don't think he would want to deal with the headache of having to pay for additional acquired territories and deal with the population and all of these problems. I think it's an opening to negotiations, especially on tariffs and goods. We can go into the tariff policy separately. Personally, I think it's a huge mistake that will end up being costly to Americans, especially with close neighbors such as Canada. But his idea is to flex muscles, to show that he can get a better deal than anyone else, that he can get wins that Biden couldn't get. And to be honest, all he has to do for that is simply reverse some of Biden's policies, including restrictions on energy trade and energy extraction with Canada. And that has, unfortunately, the current impact of his words could be counterproductive. The conservative opposition leader, who is very pro-American, who shares many of the same positions as Trump himself, came out with a very strong response, decrying this rhetoric. He said that his position has always been, regardless of Trump's comments, to restore the kind of very positive trade dynamics that has been ongoing, to deal with the national security concerns of open borders that endanger both U.S. and Canada. And these commitments are very positive, and maybe Trump did get what he wanted out of it. But the problem is the voters in Canada don't necessarily see it way. Canada is maybe less of a case in this case than Panama, but this sort of agitation that appears to be almost a hostile takeover approach to a friendly country is not necessarily going to be beneficial in the long run. It tends to create rancor and tends to bring in almost this inherent desire to do exactly the opposite, even if overall many of the people are actually sick and tired of Trudeau's policies that Trump is criticizing. I think there's a bit of an overkill here because Trudeau has resigned. The goal has been accomplished. Now it would be positive for Trump to support the potentially incoming conservative government without antagonizing everybody and creating a situation where this conservative government is pushed to defend Trudeau and his policies because of Trump's bombast and rhetoric. You couldn't be an America first without also putting everybody else last.
Daniel, obviously Trump has threatened Canada with tariffs, and this has led to Canada boosting and bolstering its security at its border. But is there a danger that these remarks could strain trade or or security partnerships between the two nations, despite Trump ruling out force?
I could easily see this spinning out of control, particularly given the election cycle now in Canada. So they're shifting to the right, that's very clear. And the question is, to what extent they're going to engage in the sort of crazy rhetoric that Trump has engaged in during the American election. We already see one of the contenders for the prime ministership in Canada suggesting that they annex 2 of the US states. That, of course, is never going to happen. And I think the real risk here is that you get a prime minister in Canada that is Trump's equal in terms of chest beating and daring people to do things. I could certainly see trade taking a hit. And in fact, it's almost guaranteed to take a hit with the rhetoric that's going on and the uncertainty that will be occurring in the next couple of months until the election occurs. So that all being said, I think we should buckle up where the US and Canada are concerned, because although there's very little risk that there's ever going to be any kind of military conflict between these two countries, there's every risk that it's going to further escalate.
And now I wanted to move on to the Gulf of Mexico, or how Trump would like it to be called, the Gulf of America. Why has Trump made these statements? Is it a kind of disagreement with Mexico over him being unhappy with the way that migration works there for his future migration plans? Ross, what do you think about this?
Obviously, President Trump has a number of issues with which he's very unhappy about with Mexico. That was clear in his first term. It's going to be clear in his second term. Those issues most notably include undocumented migrants crossing from Mexico into the United States. It also more recently includes an issue of Chinese factories or Chinese-owned factories setting up in Mexico as a way to avoid tariffs that might be imposed on goods manufactured in China. So of all the countries that President Trump is likely to criticize or make somewhat unorthodox proposals like he's doing with Greenland or Canada, Mexico certainly holds a special place, and it's going to be a special and very large target for President Trump. So the outgrowth of that, I think that we should keep in mind, is what kind of support does he get from the United States Congress? Because I think congressmen of both parties, of Republicans as well as Democrats, they realize the importance of a positive Mexico-United States relationship. So they're not necessarily looking to get into an argument with Mexico. And then further, how do the American people feel about this? There are a lot of Americans of Mexican descent, citizens of the United States of Mexican descent. So another important factor here is, how does this go down with the public if President Trump is going to make the relationship with Mexico more contentious?
Irina, Trump actually has quite a high approval rating with Mexican voters in the US. How do you see this statement going down in Mexico? Is this mostly a symbolic move?
Yes, it's basically Trump's red meat for his base. It's an opportunity to show off the America First grandstanding without actually having to engage in many of the thorny issues that are now separating U.S. and Mexico. And by the way, the issue of tariffs is almost the least of them compared to some of the more significant concerns. Illegal migration, of course, is one of them. Fentanyl move by cartels, Mexican cartels backed by China, and the proliferation of violent gangs entering the country is certainly another issue. And I think it's not going to be an easy issue to resolve. There is already some talk of U.S. moving special forces to take care of the cartels into Mexico. I don't think it's a plausible concept. I think a lot of it is just chest beating, and I think Trump does not have an easy solution with how to deal with a very populist, very hard left government that is backed by China, Russia, and Iran, and creates a real security problem right next door to the United States. And those issues are real. Renaming the Gulf to something that is not likely to be called that by anyone else is an easy way to make it look like he's strong in this area without having to delve into the issues that may not be under his control, even with all the tools that U.S. has.
Daniel, looking at all these topics, Trump is obviously very unpredictable. In what ways might Trump's willingness to use economic or military tactics, unlike previous presidents, for example in Greenland or the Panama Canal, shape US alliances with NATO and other global partners?
I think it's perfectly reasonable to put NATO in the same category as these other countries we've been talking about. It was an early target for Trump, of course, in his first administration. And very clearly, the stakes are extremely high for NATO in a lot of different respects. My own view is that NATO is much less vulnerable now in terms of Trump's rhetoric than they were, right? If the worst were to happen and the US were to withdraw from NATO, NATO's in a much better position to stand on its own 2 feet in terms of monetarily, because they've increased their GDP percentages over the last 4 or 5 years. And they're much better united than they were before, much better armed than they were before. So I think there's every reason to believe that Trump will continue to apply pressure on NATO, just like he is with these other countries. And I think once the Ukraine issue is resolved, which would very likely happen in the first 6 months, I would presume, of the Trump administration, with all the parties having been incentivized to come to the table and to find a reasonable resolution to this 3-year-long conflict, I think NATO is basically going to be able to say, our house is in order and the worst is past us, and now it doesn't matter at all what the US says. It's not like it doesn't matter, but it matters less once Ukraine has been resolved than it did.
Mahesh, I wanted to come to you next on this one. What do you see Trump's relationship with the EU being like? The French minister obviously said that it will not allow European Union countries to be attacked. What do you think about this?
I think it has to be taken at its face value. Firstly, the EU's raison d'etre is mostly economic and not strategic or political. So if anything happens, it will be in the economic domain with the EU, tariffs and anti-dumping and restrictions on supply of gas, oil, etc. That has yet to come. Trump has saved his ammunition so far and attacked Canada, Mexico, China, etc., and threatened them with high tariffs. Europe has so far been spared. So let's see which way does it go. Last time he was the president, he talked about all sort of things, including tariff on French wines and so on, and mocked at Macron publicly, saying he gave up his position on raising tariffs on American exports to France, etc., etc. Let's see how does it play out this time. But as far as strategic part is concerned, perhaps Ukraine's admission to European Union would be part of the grand bargain that we might see between Russia, Ukraine, United States, and the NATO, EU, etc. If that happens, I think there'll be huge costs to European Union for reconstruction of Ukraine, which has been devastated by nearly 3 years of war, and that may keep them busy. Moreover, with political uncertainty in France, elections in Germany, and Britain being out of circulation as far as the EU is concerned, the EU has its own hands full for the near future, and they would be praying that that the new president in White House behaves more rationally towards them and doesn't vent rhetoric and spew all sort of threats.
Ross, I wanted to move on to a different part of Trump's Mar-a-Lago press conference, where Trump criticised Biden's recent executive order protecting about 625 million acres of American waters from new drilling. How will expanding offshore drilling affect both the economy and the environment? I believe Trump used the phrase "drill, baby, drill." I apologise. Did you hear my question? Sorry. Sorry, Ross, could I ask you that question?
Sure. The interesting thing about Biden's announcement and then Trump's announcement, there's been a lot of discussion about this, especially in the energy trade press. U.S. oil producers are not eagerly trying to develop these offshore potential oil fields at the moment. There's a lot of dynamics within the global oil market, including what the current price level is, that doesn't make it particularly attractive to invest large amounts of money. There's also concern about economic downturn. China's economic sluggishness is another drag on oil prices, which might also result in U.S. producers not really looking very eager to develop these tracts of water. So Biden knew that. It kind of made it easy for him to announce this. It also makes it, the other side of that though, it makes it easy for Trump to say, I'm going to undo it. And he doesn't need to worry about whether or not oil producers are going to eagerly rush in to these areas. But the reality seems to be, based on market dynamics at the moment, American oil producers, which are already producing record amounts of oil, it's really unlikely they're going to look to drill, baby, drill in these particular areas offshore.
Irina Tuckerman, I wanted to move, staying on this topic. Do you think this kind of stance from Trump will affect his international relationships, especially as the world kind of moves forward to try and tackle this climate crisis?
To be honest with you, I think the way the international community has been approaching climate-related issues has been more of a shakedown than a substantive policy-oriented approach to real problems. And there are real problems in different parts of the world. They exist. Some of them are natural and some of them are quite due to human mismanagement. But what we are seeing at various international gatherings is more about virtue signaling, gathering money for massive projects, and essentially paying off political capital in return for unclear gains. And I think it's correct for Trump to criticize this approach. I think his energy approach is going to be welcomed by many, and not just the oil and gas industry insiders. Part of the reason is that many of the Biden's industry restrictions are less about containing serious environmental damage, which can be regulated, and more about it impedes competition. It impedes competition from countries that Biden has had very positive business relations with. And frankly, a lot of it also benefits U.S. adversaries like Russia and technically Qatar. Qatar is supposed to be our ally, but in many ways it is definitely a competitor at least, and arguably also an adversary. So I think Trump's deregulatory policies overall are going to be applauded both by Americans and by many of U.S. allies because of their strategic value, not only financial and economic immediate return. And I think these policies are going to be used strategically, both to fight domestic inflation due to the nature of some of the regulations placed by Biden. They have significantly contributed to domestic inflation, along with some of the environmental agenda, the impact of which is still very unclear, and some of which has literally not, the Biden administration has not been able to implement effectively, even after raising literally trillions. And on the other hand, it will be a signal to adversarial countries that U.S. can use strategic energy supplies to fight the economic strategy of these countries, which will also be positive for many of U.S. allies and for the U.S. itself.
And with that, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you to all our guests for joining us today. We will continue to bring you more news updates from the US and the political shift taking place throughout the country. Thank you very much.